This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, we're going to give you an update on the increasing number of storms hitting various places of the United States and the potential devastation and wipeout that is going to occur to whatever degree. And then what do we do about it in terms of prayer and then preparation? And maybe some of you listening to the program today, you are in an area that has been impacted by the hurricanes hitting the Texas area and other areas. And now we have a hurricane, or a series of hurricanes, Category 4 coming into Florida and supposedly could dump as much as 40 inches of rain in Miami, not to mention other locations that are being affected. Now, this is, very serious. A lot of homes will be lost. A lot of lives will be disrupted. And it's like our nation is being pummeled. And the question is why? Now, you can say, well, it has to do with global warming. The problem with that is that global warming is a disproven theory. I'm sure Al Gore will try to jump in the middle of this. The only reason I laugh is I'm not laughing at the people who are suffering. I'm laughing at I'm trying to be kind. The complete lack of integrity of certain individuals, and hypocrisy of certain individuals who go on a campaign for climate change and global warming, and then in their own very elite lives, they spend energy, they burn energy like there's no tomorrow to heat up their Olympic-sized swimming pools. There are multiple mansions. They fly in private giant jets to speak at conferences across the world on global warming. Why not share a jet with some people? You see, they're hypocrites. And I don't want to get into that at the moment. I want to get back into the potential reason for the hurricanes. The absolutely most important thing that we can do, which is to pray for the people in the areas, and also finding ways to actually help the victims of hurricanes. And prayer is a good start, but then prayerfully being directed to help in a way that you know that your help is actually going to get to the people in need and not just be gobbled up by a bureaucracy. So we had the storms and the continuing storms in Texas, and it was like intense, very disturbing. At the same time, in the location where I live, in northern Los Angeles County, this has always been, where I live is like, it's been going on so long since I've moved here. I've been up here for like 20 years or something. But the raging fires that you will continually see on at least once a year or several times a year, you'll see these news reports of these all-out raging fires in Southern California. Those fires are almost 95% of the time located in the area that I live, I'm talking about walking distance from where I live, or short miles from where I live, or close or very close to where I live. So every time you see these raging out of control fires, this is where I live. So I must tell you, I've become numb to it because it's such a constant. And Los Angeles announced that the fires were the fires that have been going on are the largest, either the largest fires in Los Angeles are the largest fires in the last 50 years, or all time. I don't remember. Perhaps it was all time. I think it was all time. And we have had massive fires. And the reason is two things. We have an erratic supply of water. So we have all this dry brush. And it's just waiting to burst into flame. And then tragically, and I think we need to do something about this as a society, we have arsonists. And I suspect a little bit worse than that. Because from the studio that I'm broadcasting to you in right now, which is northern Los Angeles County, I have been in this, in fact, today. If I go outside, it's thick. The atmosphere is thick with the smoke of the fires. And it was the day before and the day before. And this happens constantly. But the pictures, the visuals on TV were the most mind-blowing I've ever seen before. When I described to you, and you probably, most of you saw it, these people driving their cars. I think it was a two-lane freeway because they shortened it. So your cars are coming in two different directions. And on either side, there was just a massive walls of incredible fire, like I've never seen. I mean, I've seen driving on the freeway with fires on the hills next to you. That's like nothing here, okay? Happens all the time. You're driving and there's fires all around you, on the left side and the right side. Or in the middle, in the divider, the whole divider is burning down. You don't think anything of it because it happens so often. But what I saw yesterday, I've never seen anything like it. In addition, this particular area where we're broadcasting from is also one of the most dangerous earthquake areas in Southern California. And the massive earthquakes that you've seen, they had their epicenter here. So the big Northridge earthquake, and we're not in Northridge, which you saw the pictures of, the Northridge earthquake had a dual epicenter. So there was two primary zones where the maximum, I'm not a scientist when it comes to seismic activity, but where the seismic activity was the most violent and intense and centered. There was two epicenters, one in Northridge and literally one under the houses in which I lived. Now, we've moved, but we still moved to an area which is still an epicenter of this earthquake. And that, going back to that earthquake, which you saw the pictures of these elevated freeways, these typical California freeways where you have this, they're up in the air and there's these giant cement columns holding them up, and then it just ends. The freeway hanging there in the air ends. It's broken. Well, that is very close to where we're broadcasting from. And that is something that is continual. So this is a very, very dangerous area in terms of fires and earthquakes. And then other areas, like Florida, has been hammered. The East Coast has been hammered regularly for a while now, and they have become dangerous areas. And when I lived on the East Coast years ago as a kid, it was nothing like it is now. The amount of hurricanes that come first hitting Florida, then going up the East Coast and going as far as New York or higher, and it's a constant. And then you've seen problems in Texas before, but this one was just huge, and it's not over yet. And now we have the announcements of Hurricane Irma that is threatening the East Coast. So what is causing this? it is not climate change that's causing this. Climate change will be, they're gonna talk about climate change and blow the trumpets on climate change quite loudly, because they like to use fear, visual images of fear and panic and terror, to embed in your consciousness a false relationship between climate change and the hurricanes and the fires, etc. But that's non-existent. Now, this is supposedly a natural phenomenon, but I will introduce something, and I am in no way suggesting that it is the reason for it. I'm simply bringing up the reality of a technology that the mass media, the mainstream media, never mentions, never incorporates in its news reporting, as if this technology that I'm going to talk to you about, the media treats it as if it doesn't exist. But the problem is there's numerous respectable scientific journals which tell you it exists. In my video series, the 3 DVD series, well, One World Government, One World Religion, One World Economic System, the 3 DVD series, I have photographs, many of you have seen them, of a facility called HARP in Alaska, and there are numerous HARP-like facilities across the globe, but this main one is in Alaska. And you can, I'm no longer going to say Google search, by the way. And if I do, please email me and remind me to keep my word on that, because I have been a huge I don't know, fan isn't the word, but I found Google to be one of the better search engines, and it still is a very good search engine. I mean, Bing is like, I can't even imagine anybody. Bing reminds me of being stuck in Legoland. But I can't, these social media companies are at war with us. They really are. They're at war with us. And the thing is, they're very clever because they know how to act as if they're your best friends. And even to Christians, they think, for example, that Facebook and Google and Twitter and these other social media companies are your best friends, and they're not. These tech giants, maybe because they were financed, many of them, with CIA money, deep state money. You say, well, I don't know about that, Paul. Well, that's too bad you don't know about it. You should, if you read something besides the comic book section, you would know that what I'm talking about is something that is being reported in the mainstream media, and the so-called parts of the mainstream media which are would normally not report this stuff, but they're reporting. And mainstream magazines, and magazines like Wired and others, which are like computer technological type magazines. And there has been report after report in like the New York Times, Washington Post, Vanity Fair, and Washington Post is funded by the CIA. And so is the New York Times. You say, well, I don't believe that. It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. Just look at the facts. The facts are that since its foundation, the New York Times has been a mouthpiece for the CIA, and the Washington Post was created to be a mouthpiece for the CIA, and both of those publications have reported numerous times in the past that they have been used as CIA outlets of propaganda. But many of these mainstream media organizations, not the questionable ones, have done extensive reporting over the fact that the tech companies like Google, Facebook, etc., many of the other ones, are being financed by the deep state. That's a fact. Now, they don't cut a check out, as far as I know, saying, hi, here's a check from the CIA or the deep state. They usually do it by using a front company to hire Google or Facebook or one of these other groups for services from some giant, corporation that needs their help, or a front investment company. So, for example, Jeff Bezos, who is the head of Amazon, he also owns the Washington Post. Now, he received $600 million from the CIA, and I believe it went to Amazon. And the CIA requested from Bezos and Amazon, they needed some development, some kind of cloud system, some kind of massive, CIA needed some kind of massive cloud system. So they hired Amazon to do it for them. And so Amazon received $600 million. Well, that's a roundabout way of funding the content of the Washington Post, because Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. He's the owner of Amazon, but the Washington Post. So that's just a way of being a mouthpiece for the deep state. And then when you go back to the originations of many of the mainstream media, and I have documentation of this in my books. If you question it, pick up my book, the first book, A Prophecy of the Future of America. Read it. Read The Day the Dollar Died, and you will see documentation of ownership of the media, the creation of media empires financed with deep state CIA money. Okay? That includes Time Magazine, and they openly talk about it. It's not a secret. It's not a secret. They're not exactly going overboard to hide it. They just do it, and they control the content of the news. So Google was started with CIA funding, either directly or indirectly. Facebook was started with CIA funding, and many of the others are. And here's the epiphany that people should have. The whole purpose of Facebook and all these other social media giants ultimately is not to help you find information. It's to enable the deep state to find you and to track you and to get information on you. Metadata. They collect it all. The very thing that Snowden accused them of, they're guilty of, which is they collect 24/7 metadata. I mean, it's come up over and over again. And I was just watching, I don't know how I ended up watching it, but I saw the congressional hearing or the Senate hearing where the heads of certain deep state intelligence agencies were being questioned on whether or not they were conducting mass surveillance on ordinary American citizens or metadata. And they asked one of the heads of the NSA, who looks right into the camera and lies and says no. Now, he represents a spy agency, so you can't quite expect him to tell you, yes, we're spying. And they have a rationale and a reason for it, which is they need to be able to go back in time, so they say, and if a terrorist event of any kind occurs or something of that nature, since everything has been recorded, they could go back 10 years and check into every phone call and meeting and where this person drove and what kind of emails they sent. So that's the rationale. But it becomes dangerous because it's a threat to our constitutional rights when we have no privacy. And then we have men like former President Bill Clinton, who, like the vast majority of our politicians in Washington, D.C., are complete sellouts. They're completely corrupt. It has nothing to do with Republican or Democrat. They're corrupt. Both parties are corrupt. They've sold out. And they didn't sell out to the deep state. They sold out to the people that control the deep state, which are the elite globalists. So Clinton, as many big-time politicians, is a puppet. He's always been a puppet. And he says the American people have no reasonable expectation of privacy. So that's the mantra. What do you mean the American people have no reasonable expectation of privacy? It says in the Constitution the exact opposite. It says that you and I, in the Bill of Rights, are not to be subjected to unreasonable search and seizure of our papers, our personal belongings, etc., our documents. In other words, long before they had an electronic internet, the Bill of Rights, which is our Constitution, says that we're to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, a government going through our documents, spying on us, etc. So when Bill Clinton makes the comment, we have no reasonable expectation of privacy. What is he on, a psychedelic drug? I mean, that is a complete lie. It's a pathological lie. It's the opposite of what the Constitution says. Now, Facebook and the others, and the reason I'm bringing this up is it has come to a very serious juncture. That's why I'm bringing it up. A very serious juncture here. We're at the crossroads, and I cannot tell you how important it is to fully understand the gravity of the situation that we're in and the danger that we're in right now. It's far above storms. And the danger is that when these companies like Google and Facebook and all the others start censoring certain points of view, which they are doing big time, you are destroying freedom of speech, which is a constitutional right. You now move from an America which has freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press, and you have now moved America into a totalitarian state, because totalitarian states always suppress and remove and destroy freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. So the way they do it is a very sneaky way, and it's your job and my job to spread the word fast. You know, I see so many people playing with their Facebook and they're all thrilled. Hey, I have no problem with that. Enjoy your Facebook. I have a Facebook thing for this ministry. It's not, you know, use Facebook. But look, you're a customer of Facebook. And if you can't at least demonstrate the moral courage of thinking of something clever, not something like ragingly angry, but something clever and that gets the point across, and start protesting the fact that your point of view is being censored by Google, by Facebook, and using those very social media companies to do it, then, you know, you deserve to have your rights stolen from you. Because how can you be happy and content? They are censoring any viewpoint which is not this globalist, world socialist state, politically correct viewpoint. If you believe in being a patriotic American, if you are a Bible-believing Christian, if you believe in traditional moral values, if you voted for Donald Trump, if you're a conservative, and there's a whole long list. If you try to express your point of view or promote it using social media, whether you want to admit it or not, there's all kinds of hidden, secret computer algorithms, bots, etc., which keep your conservative Christian content from spreading. You will find the number of hits, watches, and views on stuff you send out over social media that is conservative or Christian. You'll notice that it doesn't seem to generate much interest, but that's not true. They're rigging the system so people can't find things with your point of view. You understand? It's very serious. So if you write a blistering attack on what an idiot Donald Trump is, you could find your YouTube video going viral. You could find your Facebook message attacking Trump going all over the place. You could find your Google stuff everywhere. You understand how the game is played? And this is creating a serious impact because most people don't even recognize it's happening. Now, with Google, which owns YouTube, they are destroying financially so many conservative alternative media organizations are in the process of literally being destroyed. It's like they poured gasoline over the storefronts of conservative media and they're burning them down. All right? And the way they're doing it is they're rigging their rankings. They're artificially lowering the numbers of views, hits, watches, etc. on YouTube and other social media outlets. What that does is that substantially crashes and destroys and eradicates their advertising dollars. Because if you don't generate a lot of hits or watches or whatever, these advertising companies will pay you next to nothing. Whereas if you have 50,000 hits or whatever, they'll pay you a lot of money. And so they're bankrupting the alternative media. That's how this is their stealth attack to destroy the alternative media. And notice that there's lots of conservative media that doesn't want to talk about it in the mainstream media because alternative media in reality has been growing by leaps and bounds. So many people are now tuning in or watching or reading alternative media, and the mainstream media hates it because there's an exodus of people leaving them because they don't trust them. And they're going over to alternative media. But the alternative media people, unless they develop new ways of generating money, are going to end up being destroyed because let's just take YouTube, for example. Anything that is deemed politically incorrect, like if you talk about how you believe in Trump building the wall, that is considered controversial, and I would suspect they would remove your YouTube and they would remove your ability to generate advertising dollars. You see how that works? So you're destroying videos from going viral. And then when you try to use a search engine, it used to be, the rule was this, because I do constant research. And I noticed this all accelerated within weeks before our nation gave away control of the internet to the communist Chinese. And then immediately after, I knew this was happening. I warned people it would happen. And like clockwork, within days after giving the control of the internet to the communist Chinese government, which is all about censorship, by the way, the censorship started coming hot and heavy. So what happens is, if you say anything which is not part of this world socialist, globalist, politically correct type viewpoint, you are profiled, demonized, and destroyed, but subtly. So it used to be whenever I used to use Google, I'm now changing. I decided I can't use it in good conscience. It doesn't mean I won't use it. I probably will occasionally. But see, if I just sit here, I can't live with myself. I'd rather use a search engine that is not as good, okay, and have a conscience that is clean, that I'm not supporting the Orwellian machine that's out to destroy my belief system, which is Christianity, God, salvation, etc., because that's what they're doing. And it's interesting how they're connected to the deep state, because that implies, to me anyway, that the deep state's agenda is to destroy Christianity and nationalism, etc., etc. So the way it works with Google is, I've been using Google for years, so I could type in any subject. Let's take the subject of chemtrails. Not that I've spent a lot of time researching chemtrails, but it's a good illustration. So it used to be, if you put in chemtrails into the Google search engine, on the very first page, I forgot how many categories they have per page, but on the very first page of all the articles you could link to, there would be 3 or 4 articles that you could go to, which would talk about, in truthful terms, the hidden agenda behind chemtrails, like, are they poisoning us with chemtrails? Why are they using chemtrails? Articles looking for truth, right on the front page, 4 of them. And then the rest of them would be like propaganda. It's all conspiracy theory, it's just jet exhaust, blah, 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 blah. And that same pattern, by the way, would start on page 1 of the search engine and go to like 25 pages, and I don't ever go past 25 pages. It'd be the same ratio. Or you might get an increase the deeper you went into the more conspiratorial viewpoint, which is usually the more honest viewpoint. But now, no matter what topic I type in, it's almost, from page 1, it's almost everything. If I type in climate change, every article supports climate change as a viable theory. That's how it works now. Same with page 2 on the search engine, page 3, all the way up to 33, as far as you can go. Now, to find articles that will criticize or evaluate fairly climate change, I can no longer use the Google search engine, because it won't come up like it used to with news reports, credible articles that challenge climate change. It's just all pro-climate change, page after page after page. The only way you can find the contradictory articles, or the articles that refute the official position, is you actually have to know the name of the blog site, something about the title or the author or something, and then, only then, if you type it in specifics in the Google search engine, will it take you to an article which would criticize climate change. Okay? You understand? It used to be you just put in climate change and it would be fair and ethical. And so you could choose for yourself what theory or belief system you believed was scientifically valid. Now they want to tell you. So most people don't really want to think. Most people don't do any homework or whatever, so that they wouldn't know how to find an article criticizing climate change. So when they turn the pages on their search engine, all they're going to see is propaganda. And you could go down the list on just about anything. And it's the same way. And it's not just with Google, it's with all of them. So what they've done is they've controlled the thinking. Okay? And people who are not sophisticated in using search engines are going to think, well, there is climate change must be a very valid theory because I don't see anybody refuting it, which is not true. They're burying it, they're censoring it, they're destroying it. And then when it comes to Christianity, you used to type in any subject. You could type in a subject like creation or evolution or just evolution. And you would see a bunch of articles critical of evolution. Now, you type in evolution, it's going to be all pro-evolution. And down the list. So what you have is Big Brother is dominating the thinking. All right? And it's worse than that. If you release a series of YouTubes that are not politically correct, they could take your channel from you. They'll bounce you out of Facebook if you're critical of Facebook. I mean, they didn't used to be like that. They were big enough to tolerate dissent and discussion. So when it comes to election time, this is when it's going to get very dangerous. You're going to see a total control of the point of view. And it's being done on purpose. It's being done in partnership with the mainstream media. It's being done in partnership and the financial help of the deep state. And it's all controlled by the ultimate puppet masters, which are the super wealthy globalist elite that want to totally control everything. Oh, and any criticism of these, so you type in like Federal Reserve, or you type in the international banking families. Well, you used to be able to find out all kinds of information, but now they're burying it and they're censoring it. This is very, very dangerous. And if it is, this is the final moment in which something can be done. If you don't speak out, and the smartest way to speak out, just off the cuff of just thinking at the moment, is to, yes, post on Facebook or whatever, dare to say, call them out. You can say something nice like, I love to use my Facebook, but stop censoring my information. In other words, do something. Be responsible for your freedoms. And then they may or may not take it down. But if enough people start doing it, they'll allow it because they don't want, they don't want to be, their vulnerability is they don't want to be caught red-handed being the evil George Orwell Big Brother censor. But that's what they're really doing. So if you don't speak out now, it'll be over. You understand that? Once this path is embarked on, there's no turning back. It will be the new status quo. Because there are many, many powerful people who want it just this way. They don't want you to be able to type in George Soros and see how many activist groups he's financing. They don't want that. So again, it comes to, we're in a battle for the hearts and minds of mankind. We are in a battle of sharing and communicating knowledge. Knowledge is power. Truth sets you free. But you see, if you've lost your ability to communicate the truth and knowledge, you've lost the battle. And it's over. Then you live under a dictatorship or a totalitarian state. Because the first thing every dictatorship does and every totalitarian state does throughout history, whether it was Adolf Hitler or Stalin or whoever it is, Chairman Mao, they always take control of the media. And they always, among the totalitarian states, they shoot and kill and imprison anybody in the media who challenges the official lies. And that's how they maintain their power. You think there was a free media in Cuba? What do you think happened to Cuban journalists who dared to criticize Fidel Castro? Just give a guess. Or Stalin or Hitler. What do you think happened to them? So this is important. And you need, because if you're not willing to do this small thing, I would suggest to you, and I'm not trying to be unkind, I would suggest to you that you're AWOL, you're absent without leave from the spiritual battle. And there's really no great risk to you. Like some of you think, well, gee, I'll be profiled as a conservative. Well, let me give you a clue. You're already profiled as a conservative. All right? But you need to spread the word, and you need to encourage other people to spread it. Now, having said that, let's move into some of the news coverage surrounding the hurricanes. But I felt compelled to say that because if this trend is allowed to continue, see, there's a lot of lawsuits going on right now from some very powerful legal justice organizations against Amazon, against the Washington Post, against Google, against Facebook, because of their monopoly here and overseas, and because they're trying to control all information. They play, you know, these tech giant guys, you know, they love to come off with the image that they just wear blue jeans and running shoes and T-shirts, and they're good old not good old boys, but they're really nice guys. You know, they're one of the people. That is a manufactured propaganda lie. Okay, it doesn't matter how they dress. They're worth billions of dollars. They live on a level vastly wealthier than a Saudi Arabian prince. Never forget it. And look at the way they behave in their social lives. Like Zuckerberg, literally buying up all the homes near his home and erecting giant walls and borders because he doesn't want anyone close to his mansion. So you know, they're hypocrites. And I'll add one other thing for you to think about, and a reason why you should pre-order Conquering the Matrix. I'm not going to say who it is. I just want you to look carefully at the eyes and countenance of one or two of the social media giants. Just look at their face, their facial expression, their eyes carefully. And this requires using your perceptive abilities and study them for a while. Then I want you to look at the eyes and countenance of some of these Manchurian candidates that are drugged and programmed. Now, I'm not saying for 1 minute that the tech giants are Manchurian candidates and, you know, would go off and do so. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm asking you to ask yourself the question, had they been through some kind of programming process? And I'm asking you to develop your perceptive abilities and look at the facial countenance, look at the eyes, look and see if there's a glazed look in the eyes, because that is usually a symptom of something else. Look at them carefully and try to make an evaluation. It may be difficult for you if you've never done it before, but I think it's an exercise that you should put yourself through. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. We're going to get into the storms, but I felt compelled to talk about that because of what I'm going to talk about next regarding the storms in Texas and really how this ties in for the battle for the spiritual battle for America, the hearts and minds of Americans. And I want to point something out to you that you've probably observed yourselves, but you're not going to hear about it in the mainstream media. They want to cover it up. But the alternative media has been talking about it, and it's an important fact. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Archives of the program, you can send this program to not send it to paulmcguire.us. That would be to send it in a circular manner. You can use the archives and send this program or any radio program you want from the Paul McGuire Report free through the various social media technologies we use, as long as they're available to us, to send copies of this radio program to people that need to hear it. And we also have bulk discounts on our books. You can pre-order Conquering the Matrix, and that will be coming relatively soon. So please be patient. I thank you for your patience, and I think it will be well worth the wait, because there will be information in there that I don't think you've ever come across before. And we're going to get into it a little bit on today's program. So you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. Let's remember to pray for the people that have been impacted by the earthquake, impacted by the hurricanes in Texas and other areas, the people who will be impacted by the hurricanes in Florida, people impacted by the fires in Southern California and other places. Let's remember them in our prayers, and if possible, do something specific to help them. And because many people who listen to this program live in that area, and prayer is not some cop-out. Prayer really can make the difference for them. So let's stand in prayer and ask the Lord to have his mercy, not only on people who listen to the program in those areas, but everybody who listens, or everybody who's been potentially impacted. Let's pray for all of them, that God would supernaturally intervene. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. And we will be back in a second. You are listening to the Paul McGuire Report on Paul McGuire. When we have looked at problems, in the United States over the last 4 or 5 years or longer, you have noticed, and I have noticed, what I perceive to be not naturally evolving. I'm not talking about evolution. I'm talking about naturally evolving circumstances. In other words, we have seen many race riots, very amplified racial tensions, and I'm not saying that there weren't specific events that caused the anger to spill over. I'm not saying that cops didn't shoot some innocent black men, and there wasn't a legitimate cause for the anger and the protest and the demands for investigation. I'm not saying that. And then I'm not saying that there weren't innocent cops who were shot and killed, because that also happened. But what I am saying, it's my observation as somebody who has personally experienced, when I was in college, being in demonstrations at this time. These were the anti-war demonstrations, anti-Vietnam War demonstrations. So I was participating in them in New York, as well as the University of Missouri. And I was a radical liberal back then, an atheist, etc., etc. So, but I began to observe that these so-called counterculture demonstrations and anti-war demonstrations were professionally organized and professionally financed by pretty high-level people. And without getting into all the details, I'll never forget the time that a professional organizer of demonstrations came to the campus of the University of Missouri. And the way his haircut was, the way his physical presence was, the way he communicated, the utmost professionalism, and he demonstrated a unique intelligence. He demonstrated that he had been highly trained in what he was doing. And it was obvious to me that this was not just some long-haired hippie radical organizing an anti-war demonstration, that this was somebody who was a professional. The question was, who was he and who was he working for? Now, I think I have the answer to that today. But his job was to stir up the demonstration, to make it as violent, theatrical, out of control as possible, so the television cameras would cover it. So things haven't changed, because when I just if I didn't know the facts behind the scenes, which I happen to know a lot of the facts behind the scenes, like who the super billionaire is who's financing all these demonstrations, sending in teams of highly trained professional demonstration organizers, okay, they're trained in psychology and all kinds of things. And watching them, watching the physical footage of the racial riots and the tensions and seeing it visually on TV, I could see who the professional protest organizers were. Many of them were women in their 50s, okay, veterans of many demonstrations. I could see how they were maneuvering people, and it was like they were putting on a theatrical production. This wasn't just a bunch of people spontaneously protesting something. They were being whipped into an emotional frenzy. And the game plan, it was obvious to me, was to create in America a racially charged environment, to artificially inflame racial tensions and racial hatred via the media, by the way the media would cover the demonstrations. So it became apparent to me that the mainstream media was working closely with certain organizations and groups that were heavily financed, and their game plan was to take a legitimate concern, like somebody being an African-American male being shot by a cop, but to blow it up into a complete chaos and spread and multiply as fast as possible a racially charged atmosphere where people are ready to go ballistic. And in Charlottesville recently, with the white supremacists and all that, why was the governor, McCarthy, telling the police to stand down? Because he was telling the police to stand down because he wanted to see the riot go out of control for his own political agenda. So that's what we have in the United States. For the last number of years, and even continuing till today, we have what I would call, it's not that there is not racism in America, there is. But there's a whole lot of people that are white, African American, Latino, and other groups that, just in LA, that get along, help each other, are friendly, don't hate each other, and live together as a diverse community. That you're not seeing that in the media. You're not seeing people friendly, loving, caring for one another from a diverse group of racial groups. You're not seeing images of that in the media. You're being presented with a false depiction of what America is like, because the hidden agenda is, you got to remember that the people behind this in very high places and very wealthy billionaires don't assume they're capitalists. Capitalists financed the original communist revolution. So super capitalists are financing a socialist revolution in the United States of America. And the reason I know that is because I was deceived and manipulated as a young man myself. into being caught up in these anti-war demonstrations and counterculture demonstrations and everything else. So I know what it's like to be on the other side of the fence. But I didn't have all the facts. So the goal here is to inflame racial tensions, to spread race riots, to spread houses, cities being burnt down, to keep the atmosphere so tense that there is a constant wave of police shootings and vice versa, and make America a racially charged place ready to explode. And their game plan is they want to ignite race riots with such intensity and such acceleration that everything gets out of control, that whole cities are being burnt down, that people's lives are being threatened, that chaos erupts around the White House and everything else, because their hidden agenda is they want to use manufactured crisis, which is Saul Alinsky and the Marxist strategy. They want to use manufactured crisis, manufactured race riots for a pretense to establish martial law, which is a military dictatorship or a police state. So you see, if you have enough chaos going on in the United States, from whatever source, terrorist attack, EMP attack, race riots, there's a lot of cards to play, then at some point you can, because they've changed the Constitution illegally, both Republicans and Democrats, you can create a state of martial law where the president becomes a dictator, so to speak. And when the military runs the country, all your constitutional freedoms are gone. And people in America have absolutely no clue what it would be like to live in a military police state. It's not that the guys in the military are all evil or something like that. It's when you give the military absolute power to control the civilian population, you have to remember that the military, the armed forces, that our soldiers are trained to be warriors. They're trained to kill enemies on the battlefield. They're warriors. That's their programming. That's their training. They are not trained in how to deal with civilians in your own country. They're trained to kill in an all-out war. And that's very dangerous because the police and other local agencies are trained in dealing with a civilian population. And even when they're at their toughest, the police don't act like a military force, because a military force will just start shooting people down. You understand? So there are very powerful groups in the United States that are heavily financed that want to see martial law established. Now, let's go back to the news footage of these hurricanes. I thought it was quite interesting. I'm sure many of you saw the news footage of the hurricanes in Texas. And I saw so much video from certain outlets. Some outlets don't ever want to show you anything positive. I saw picture after picture, video after video of white, African American, Latino, Middle Eastern people holding each other, physically carrying an older person, doing everything, sharing food, loving one another, being kind to one another. I saw image after image, video after video of this incredible racial harmony in Texas, this incredible love for one another, okay, and willingness to roll up your sleeve and help your brother or sister no matter what race they were in. I didn't see any images of race riots or racial hatred or racial tension. And I was overwhelmed with the amount of video footage and pictures of people from a diverse spectrum of races, not fighting each other, not rioting, but helping each other, lifting each other up, doing incredible sacrifices for one another. And I believe that that represents the overwhelmingly larger population in the United States, because I see it where I go. I travel all across the country, and in LA, we're, like many places, we're very diverse racial composition in LA. People are courteous to one another, they're kind to one another, they're giving, they help one another, they act like a community. So you got to understand that there are people in the business of creating a lying narrative, a lie. There are revolutionaries, if you will, embedded in our society, being financed by big-time billionaires and activist groups that want to portray a false picture of what America is like. So they send their cameras everywhere to show you races fighting one another, attacking one another, killing one another. And not only that, the dirtiest truth of all is they are involved in many, many different ways through covert, sneaky, deceitful, lying ways. There are actually high-level people who are deliberately using their agents and other resources that they have they're deliberately manipulating and stirring up the racial hatred. They're stirring up the racial hatred. They want it to come to a boiling point where it boils over. They're doing everything they can logistically with their money, with actors, with leaders, with activist groups, with propaganda and advertising. They're doing everything they can to create an all-out race war in America. Now, let's go back to McCarthy, the governor of where Charlottesville was. Why did he tell the police to stand down? And this has happened in other places too, where there was big racial riots. And the governors and the mayors of these cities, sadly to say, most of them were Democrat, ordered their police to stand down so that the fires of racism and racial hatred would be given the full opportunity to explode. And not only that, so that actual crimes would be committed. So the bad guys on both sides of the fence would have the opportunity to burn down buildings and stuff. So you see, here we have people in positions of power that are abusing their power and ordering the police and other groups to do things where normally they could have nipped it in the bud and there would have been no riot. They're actually doing things to make sure there's the most nastiest, violent, bloody riot that there is, because they want to create the atmosphere of the United States of America to be so ready for race riots so that they can control martial law. See, we're dealing with real evil in our nation. Real evil. And whether that's coming from a Republican or a Democrat or a super billionaire, to show you the level of corruption, it's a known fact that some of these super billionaires are financing with amazing sums of money riots. They're not financing demonstrations. They're financing riots. They're financing conflict between the police and different racial groups. Now, that would be, and so when I saw the news footage, and this wasn't coming largely from the mainstream media, I'd have to say it was coming largely from the alternative media and individuals on Facebook, etc. Thank God Facebook shows you the importance, shows you the absolute importance of keeping Facebook free. and Google free these videos of positive, harmonious race relations were sent by the people through their social media and through alternative media. And it showed, now the mainstream media clamped down on it because they don't want to create the impression that there's racial harmony in America, because they're part of the problem. You see, they are the agents of globalism. And you know, you can dance around it all you want, and you can be nice and polite, but you're fooling yourself. And if you know somebody who works in those organizations or whatever, you can play all the games you want. But just 6 globalist corporations control all the mainstream media in the United States, and they control what kind of news coverage, what agenda they want, and it's a socialist agenda. And what people don't understand, they really don't get it, is that socialism appears to be the solution for the common man, and that's the biggest lie there is. Socialism is not the solution for the common man. Socialism is what will kill the common man. You see, there is, how can I say this as succinctly as possible? I've said it in my new book, Conquering the Matrix, which you should pre-order, because you need to understand what's going on. Now, I wrote about a lot of this in Mass Awakening. I wrote a lot about this in the first book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, where I talked about the race riots in detail and how they were coming. You'd be surprised how many books I've written, which in a sense, I don't claim to be a prophet, but they correctly predicted these problems in advance. Like A Prophecy of the Future of America predicted the race riot thing and exactly how it would happen. Mass Awakening shows you exactly how the people are being programmed and for what end. The second book, with all new material, Prophecy of the Future of America 2016-2017, talked all about, before Trump made his announcements and stuff, talked all about the exodus of decent paying jobs for the middle class and working class, and the outsourcing of manufacturing plants. The same with The Day the Dollar Died. Conquering the Matrix deals with what I'm talking about now. And it's hard to explain in a couple of sentences. But what you have to understand these basic facts. These are really non-negotiable facts. I've spent 40 years studying this. The conclusions are airtight. The problem is the denial by the American public and other people. There exists an invisible elite that is very, very powerful. Okay? They've been here a long time. Then in the 50s and early 1900s, the Fabian socialists, the intellectual leaders of Great Britain, very powerful men that came from elite families like Aldous Huxley. Let's just talk about Aldous Huxley. He writes a novel called Brave New World, which depicts a futuristic dictatorship where the people are all happy because they're controlled by scientific mind control and drugs, and they've destroyed the family unit. People just go to orgies and stuff. They've destroyed in the minds of women and men. They've brainwashed them to hate the concept of motherhood, a mother giving birth to her children. They've brainwashed people to totally reject the nuclear family, totally welcome in socialism. And then in Brave New World, Huxley talks about how in this futuristic dictatorship they will use genetic engineering to create a caste system or a class system, people that are genetically built to be like slaves and workers and lower level managers, and then you allow genetically a master race. Okay. Now, people thought that this was just like a science fiction book, but it wasn't. It was a plan by the secret occult globalist elite in Great Britain. It was a plan to reorganize the nations of the world and societies of the world. Specifically, the number one target nation was the United States of America and Great Britain. And so Huxley came here in 1936, and he launched. He was a very charming man, very intellectual. He came off, like an artist, a writer, an intellectual. But he and others, like Dr. Gregory Bateson, who was married to the famous anthropologist Margaret Mead, and he himself was an anthropologist. And with Margaret Mead, they went to the island of Bali, I think it was in the 50s, and they shot black and white footage of a tribal culture going into a trance state. And Bateson studied the trance state of the people in Bali quite carefully, and they recognized, along with Huxley, that they could develop and further scientific mind control by causing people to enter into a trance state, the usage of psychedelic drugs like LSD, the usage of the mass media, the usage of social engineering. So everything that you're seeing today in America and Britain and other places in the world is, again, it's not the product of random chance. It's by design. The chaos, the wars, the riots, the problems are socially engineered by scientists who are neuropsychiatrists, neuroscientists, and it has embedded itself in all facets of our society, because you have to understand this principle, and if you don't, you're always going to be at a disadvantage. And this is so frustrating to me as a Christian author and a writer and speaker, because I have taught at seminaries, and my specialty is Bible prophecy, and I'm a professor of eschatology and Bible prophecy. But I feel obligated to communicate in detail what I just shared with you, with newer generations of leadership, especially among Christian ministers, etc. But they are mentally shut down from it. And the reason they're mentally shut down to factual information is they've been brainwashed, they've been programmed. And therefore, they can never be effective as ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let me say this again. Because they do not understand the way the world works in our modern era, and I'm specifically focusing in on perhaps the most powerful technology in use by our modern world, but it is a technology where the vast majority of people do not even understand that such technology exists and that it's operational. And so in my books, I try to teach and educate people about this technology so they can overcome it. And I have a great burden for this, because what I see is a lack of breakthrough, a lack of progress, a lack of souls being saved, a lack of people being discipled, a lack of Christian behavior. And I'm not saying, you see, it's a cop-out to say, well, it's the last days and things get evil, or are going to get more evil and more evil. That's true, but take it in context. Don't cop out. And I try to teach at these seminars to Christian leaders and pastors and professors historical, scientific, sociological, psychological facts as to why these things are happening. I have impeccable documentation. My sources are mainstream sources from the highest levels. See, Aldous Huxley would be the highest level source, as would Dr. Gregory Bateson be. But you see, these men developed and perfected the science of modern mind control in the 1800s, and they've been perfecting it ever since. A breakthrough point was during the end of World War II, where the Nazis created MK-Ultra, where they created Manchurian candidates or assassins by programming their minds with scientific mind control and the usage of LSD. It's a science, but that's like the Model T Ford version of scientific mind control. Scientific mind control since the end of World War II has skyrocketed. It is one of the fastest growing technologies, and yet it's a technology that almost nobody in the public knows about. And the reason why you have race wars, and please listen to me carefully, the reason that you have race wars and race riots and racial division, the reason why more young people are not accepting Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, the reason why the morality inside the church is the same as the morality outside of the church is not because Christians are just a bunch of backslidden sinners. There's a deeper reason, and it's connected to scientific mind control. The reason why it's very difficult to ignite revival in America and other places is not just because we haven't prayed enough or fasted enough or bound enough demons. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's important, but that's not the whole story. I can't tell you the passion and the burden I feel to express this. And I can't do it just by speaking on the radio. That's why I write the books. And it's my prayer that some people will catch the burden and the Lord would open up their eyes to what I'm talking about, because if they understand what's happening, they will be very powerful and effective in undoing it, because God wants it undone. Okay, so these things like race riots, race wars, things like the blockage of young people coming to Christ, things like immorality being accepted and preachers and ministers not being able to apparently make very much breakthrough in those areas. What I'm suggesting to you is that you have to understand there's a spiritual element, but if you do not understand and if you do not incorporate in your thinking the reality of highly advanced scientific mind control that is in full usage right now, then you will never be able to win the spiritual battle, and you'll never be able to win the hearts and minds of mankind. Because when Aldous Huxley came here, he came here literally with an army of influence of the highest level scientists, psychologists, even Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, who was a complete phony and a cocaine addict, was part of this. And the British institution called the Tavistock Institute, which is a mind control institute, which works in partnership with Stanford Research Institute. See, the whole counterculture, I really hope your ears can hear what I'm saying. The whole counterculture of the 1960s and the 1970s was what? In reality, it was a total rebellion against Christianity. It was a total attack on Christianity. You have to understand it for what it really was. The purpose of the counterculture and rock and roll was to take down Christian America. You can read, I have the quotes in my books like Conquering the Matrix and Mass Awakening and A Prophecy of the Future of America. You can read their list of agendas. Number 1, destroy Christianity. Number 2, destroy Christian marriage. Number 3, destroy Christian morality. Number 4, remove concepts like right or wrong. Number 5, get rid of nationalism and patriotism. Okay? That's what the counterculture did. So what they did, now listen really carefully here, what they did is they took the scientific techniques of scientific mind control, the same ones that the Nazi scientists developed with the MK Ultra, LSD, creation of Manchurian candidates who were assassins. They were able to program them to be assassins by using a whole spectrum of techniques: sensory deprivation, repetitive brainwashing, LSD, and other techniques, hypnosis. That created assassins, or it could create sex slaves. By sex slaves, I mean you can program men or women, and they did, and they're still programming them today, to be sex slaves, or what you would call presidential model sex slaves. Many people think that Marilyn Monroe was one, so that she was a programmed personality who was to keep to capture the fancy of President John F. Kennedy and to get him physically involved in her, so that she could spy on him and get information on him and keep a watch over him. It's called, in the intelligence agencies around the world, that thing is called a honeypot. Now, a honeypot doesn't necessarily mean there's scientific mind control, but the concept within spying and intelligence for centuries, the usage of what they call a honeypot, is standard spying procedure. Most of the time, you find a attractive, sexually seductive, romantically seductive female who is able to seduce a male in power, a spy, a politician, or whatever, and compromise him or get information using her feminine skills. Okay, that's been going on for centuries, the honeypot. But when you add to the spying trade programmed, scientifically mind-controlled, programmed honeypots, where you're using LSD and other techniques to program them to be very effective in winning and spying, but they're under mind control. You understand that? Okay, now, why this is important is that these scientists who are being bankrolled by the wealthiest people in the world, we're talking Rockefeller, Rothschilds, that's a fact. It's not speculation. I have the documentation in my books. Read my books, Conquering the Matrix, Prophecy, the Future of America, the first book, the entirely new one with all new material, A Prophecy, the Future of America, 2016-2017, Mass Awakening. Are you ready? Read it. Read it. Understand what's being written in it, because it explains this. The invisible elite, the shadow government, the deep state, by the way, is merely a tool of the shadow government or the invisible elite. Now, what they learned to do, they actually learned how to do it in the 1900s. They used it with the Communist Revolution in Russia. They used it, Adolf Hitler used it in the 1930s with Germany. Chairman Mao used it. What they learned to do is to take the scientific techniques of mass mind control, propaganda, brainwashing, persuasion, and indoctrination, and not just target one individual or a group of individuals, but through sophisticated scientific mind control, you could now target an entire population, like the entire population of Germany, of Russia, of China, the United States, Great Britain. So now we live in a world where entire populations, such as the population of the United States and Great Britain, are being subjected to scientific mass mind control that incorporates many of the exact, precise, same scientific procedures they would use on an individual. The basic formula for scientific mind control, whether we're talking about an individual or the masses, is a formula, and I talk about it in my book, Mass Awakening, called pain, drugs, hypnosis. You subject a mass population or an individual to incredible shock and psychological pain or physical pain. In a sense, that blows their mind. It traumatizes them. It is essential. I'm talking about very high-level stuff, folks, okay? Very high-level stuff. Some of you will get it. Some of you will think this is Twilight Zone time. It is essential to traumatize the targeted population or individual, because that throws them into a dissociative state. That makes them psychologically unbalanced, and when you're unbalanced psychologically, you're vulnerable to programming. So you have pain or shock or trauma. Then you have drugs. Using mind-altering drugs, whether they're legal drugs given to you by your doctors, whether they're marijuana or street drugs or LSD. The more powerful the drug, the more effective the scientific mind control is. But you can give people a cocktail of legal drugs that you can get from your doctor. And then brainwashing, repetitive messages through the media via symbols, subliminals, coded messages over and over again. Like advertising, you keep repetitively drum beating certain messages into the consciousness. Specifically, the goal is to embed it in the subconscious mind of individuals. Now, this constitutes what's called hypnosis. Hypnosis is a psychological technique where you bring somebody into a trance state. A trance state doesn't mean you have to act all wacky. A trance state can be so subtle people wouldn't even observe it. But when somebody is in a trance state and you're using the other techniques, you can control them. Now let's go back to Dr. Gregory Bateson, who worked hand in hand with Aldous Huxley. Huxley was the guy that promoted LSD and mescaline. They used Timothy Leary. They used the rock and roll groups like the Grateful Dead. They used the Rolling Stones. They used the Beatles. They preached the gospel of LSD. And they got millions and millions of young people to take all kinds of drugs, including LSD, because they were subjecting them to scientific mind control. Now, the drugs are important because it accelerates the entire process. Then you put the person in a hypnotic state. And many of you might realize, I explain it in the new book, Conquering the Matrix, but a famous psychologist, Milton Erickson, was in the 40s and the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, and I think up into the 90s, he brought hypnotic techniques alive in scientific mind control. He developed what was called conversational hypnosis, where he could simply talk to somebody in a casual conversation, and without realizing it, the vast majority of them would enter a subtle trance state or a deep trance state. That was taught to hundreds of psychologists and psychiatrists, and when you use that with the other scientific mind control techniques, you now can create a Manchurian Candidate or worse, okay? So, the Nazis, because they had no conscience and they were deeply involved in the occult, they began the most horrific experiments in MKUltra, where they would shatter people's minds with LSD, program them, and then they would be like programmed assassins or whatever. After World War II, 10,000 Nazi rocket scientists were brought to America by the CIA in what was called Operation Paperclip. It was the CIA director Allen Dulles, Dulles International Airport, who was Rockefeller's man, who brought the Nazi rocket scientists, the Nazi genetic scientists, and the Nazi mind control scientists into the United States. The official reason was, and I'm sure it's partially true, was that if we did not grab these scientists, Russia or the Soviet Union would. And therefore, whoever had these scientists on their side would have victory in the next war. So Russia competed with the United States in grabbing the Nazi rocket scientists, mind control, and genetic scientists. Because like it or not, war is ruthless, and if Russia has them and we don't have them, we're going to lose. But the problem is that the vast majority of these Nazi rocket scientists were members of secret occult societies, like Vril and Thule Society, as Hitler was. And they were Satanists and Luciferians. And what you need to know, and this is like the doing the math, okay? Doing the math properly. You have to understand that scientific mind control, although it is a science, is directly connected from its origins to occultic, demonic, satanic religions and practices. You have to understand that. Now, the invisible elite that runs the world, which I also term the Luciferian elite, are worshipers of Satan. And they practice satanic rituals. And so the proponents of scientific mind control, whether they want to admit it or not, the ones in the top, they know they're Satanists, or they worship in occult manners. Like Huxley obviously was a Satanist. Bateson obviously had to be a Satanist. And then you have people like Timothy Leary, who comes off all smiley and nice, promotes LSD. But why is he saying, if he's not a Satanist, why is he saying that he's the reincarnation of Aleister Crowley, the great Satanist? Okay, so there's a direct correlation between scientific mind control and demonic activity, Satanism, and Luciferianism, whether you're programming individuals or you're programming a mass culture. So, when you put people through scientific mind control, or where you put a population through scientific mind control, the formula is pain, drugs, hypnosis. Pain is trauma. It's horror. It could be being 2 years old and being subjected to a satanic ritual that involves pedophilia, rape, and all kinds of nightmarish things, because that shatters the personality. You have another form of mind control called monarch mind control. In monarch mind control, you subject an individual personality, and it can be applied to a mass culture also, to overwhelming shock, horror, degradation, abuse, pain. Okay? That's the first part of the formula. You have to do that because when you take, and it's best to do it, I'm saying it from their point of view, to little children, because they're easier to program. You subject them to these horrific experiences because the pain, psychologically and physically, and the shock is so overwhelming to both infants, little children, and adults that the only way the human mind can handle the overwhelming horror and shock it's being subjected to is, as a defense mechanism, the human mind then splinters itself into multiple personalities. Multiple personalities is a way of absorbing the enormous shock that you've put a human personality through, all right? You amplify that shock through LSD and other drugs. Now, often that shock will involve, and this is from reports of people who have survived or come out of mind control, they will often involve being subjected to at 9 months old, or a year old, or 5 years old, or young adults, or whatever, people are subjected to absolutely horrific satanic rituals in which horrible things like rape, brutality, sadism, murder, death, eating of blood. I don't even want to get into it. Pedophilia. I have to stop it there, but because I could describe it more and it wouldn't give us. It just it's too much. Okay. When a child or an adult is exposed to that overwhelming trauma, to a satanic ritual, amplified by LSD or whatever, their personality shatters into multiples in order to psychologically survive, which is the intention. When the personality is broken into multiples, then you continue the process, but notice how the scientific process incorporates Satanism into a scientific process to produce a mind-controlled individual. Each personality then becomes a separate personality with a separate name, a separate identity, and a separate purpose. Like one personality could be an assassin, one could be a sex slave, one could be like a politician type or a compassionate type, one could be a Christian. It could be any number of things with different temperaments and moods. But you also place what's called an altar inside of every multiple personality. And an altar is just what it means. It's an altar, like it's an altar of worship, like in churches. But in this case, it's a satanic altar. A satanic altar is placed in every single personality of the multiple personalities in the mind control process. So what you're doing is you're invoking and inviting a separate and unique demon to enter each personality. Then you subject the person to continue horrors, but then you also intermix it with rewards and punishments. Then you bury it in the subconscious. You might use electroshock therapy to burn out any memories of you being programmed, okay? Because in order for it to be effective, the person cannot have a memory of being programmed. It all has to be stuffed deep down in their subconscious mind, and they have to be unable to retrieve it. So part of the process is very powerful hypnosis, but in most cases, electroshock therapy, which literally burns out in the human brain any memory or any memory storage in the human mind of any events or situations where you might go back through your memory and remember that, my God, I was actually programmed and I was actually subjected to these horrific things. And oftentimes the programming can fall apart and people have to go in for a reboot. This is dirty and nasty stuff. Now, when you read the writings of Huxley, which I quote in the new book, Conquering the Matrix, but I also quote in Mass Awakening, the first book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, the second book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016, 2017, and the other books, you see clearly the pattern. Now, what can be done to an individual, and by the way, this has become so sophisticated and widespread, you now have key individuals in all segments of society, whether politicians at the highest level, superstar musical performers, actors, celebrities, politicians, sports super athletes. There's such a huge number of people who are movers and shakers in our society who have been through variations of this mind control process. That's why they all have the same political, social viewpoint. But buried in themselves, they're programmed. Now, I'm not going to come out and name the ones that I highly suspect that have been programmed, but they would be people you know. Now, this same process that happens on an individual, you can subject an entire population to do that. Okay? Hitler did it to varying degrees, and others did it. But now think about America. The amount of shock, horror, and trauma that we're exposing young people and adults to through the media, through episodic TV, through horror movies, through whatever. I mean, really, if you're a young little kid, man, that is shock, horror, trauma, pain. You introduce the element of drugs, either by having a doctor prescribe it, or drugs that are snuck into our environment in ways that you wouldn't realize it, that have subtly changed your consciousness, or the usage of illegal drugs, or the usage of prescription drugs. And then there are all kinds of technologies that change human consciousness through electromagnetic frequencies and EMF waves that can be generated from an external source. So the technology of computer-brain interfaces is, they're talking about like it was invented today. No, it's been around for 40 years. So you now have the technological capability of changing somebody's consciousness through electromagnetic frequencies and EMF waves. And it can do basically what a psychedelic drug like LSD can do. All right? So you package all this stuff together. Let's just take a theoretical model. I'm not saying this happened. Please understand that what I'm saying to you now, I'm not saying that I know that this happened, and this is an example of what I'm talking about, mass mind control. I'm using it as an illustration of what it might look like, because you'll all know what it is. Okay, so we have the hippie generation, right? The kids of that era. I was in that era. Now, we see the Kennedy assassination on our television sets. That is trauma, psychological shock and horror. Never been seen before. Everybody, every kid in America, especially of a particular generation, at a very young age, sees the president's head being blown off in just the most, just like it's shock and trauma. Got it? Then there are many mysterious abductions of young adults during this time period, from the early 50s to like the 60s, 70s. Kids disappearing, being secretly subjected to mind control experiments. Okay, now remember that initial shock. Then the Vietnam War, another huge psychological shock. Now pay close attention. Everybody of that generation's, their friends, their family members, they all know people that died, who never made it back sane, who were blown up. It was shock and trauma of a horrific nature, all right? So you have Kennedy assassination, you have the other Kennedy assassination, you have the Martin Luther King assassination, and you have the ravages of the Vietnam War. You're talking about a series of shock, trauma, pain. Then you have the rise of the media, hypnotically communicating messages and paradigms. Then you have the British invasion of rock and roll music to the same generation, and the primary reason for the British invasion, Rolling Stones, Who, the Beatles, all the other groups promoting drugs, promoting LSD, promoting marijuana, promoting free sex, The Doors, Jimi Hendrix, Grateful Dead, promoting all that stuff, and promoting the usage of LSD and marijuana and other mind-altering drugs. Okay, you see the formula happening here? And then you have hypnotic embedding of information through media, through films, through music, repetitive brainwashing. So what I'm telling you is that essentially the paradigm or methodology of scientific mind control that is used targeting a specific individual, potentially could have happened to a mass population, a particular generation or two, the 60s generation, which I come out of. Because all of the ingredients of scientific mind control are played out within an 8-year period. And you've transformed the direction of America, which is the intent. And what was the intent? Because remember, the people at the top are Luciferians. The intent was, in their own words, to destroy Christianity, destroy the Christian family, to destroy Christian morality, to destroy nationalism or patriotism. Remember John Lennon's song, Imagine There's No Heaven? That was just part of the programming, just part of the programming. And you hear that music every New Year's Eve because repetition is hypnosis. Now, let's just put a comma on that. You cannot be an effective communicator. You can't break through to people that, see, this produces a trance. Now, don't confuse trance with walking around in a zoned out state. A trance, you can talk to people in a trance and not necessarily, well, if you're perceptive, you understand they're in a trance. But people in a trance, for the most part, don't act like they're in a trance. It's like a trance that takes a high degree of perception to recognize. So now you're trying to reach people, family members, loved ones, co-workers. You're in the ministry. You're trying to reach the younger generation for Jesus, the millennials. You're trying to teach the Word of God. You're trying to get your loved ones to embrace Christian morality and Christian teaching, so on and so on, win them to the Lord. But you're meeting this incredible resistance. The resistance is a combination of spiritual forces and demonically inspired and directed scientific forces. That's the blockage between you communicating and seeing those results. Now, you win the hearts and minds of mankind by cracking that barrier. But a better way than cracking the barrier is to use skill and wisdom and the anointing of the Holy Spirit and the Word of God and melt the barrier. Melt it. Because if you come out the barrier with force, that will cause the person who's captured by the barrier to strengthen their will to oppose. And you're actually making it worse. The better way is to melt it with the love of God and with truthfulness and being a fisher of men. That's the purpose of this ministry. What I shared with you is the facts of why we are where we are, but you see, you can't win in communicating with people through media, through preaching, or anything unless you understand the depths of the dynamics that you're dealing with. And that's why this ministry and what God has called me to do, Paul McGuire Ministries and Paradise Mountain Church, we are called to effectively win people to Christ, communicate a biblical worldview to them, reach them with the love of Jesus, teach them the importance of occupying the land until he comes, Jesus, and communicating the Word of God to people. But in order to do that, not only do we need to be effective, biblical, creative, but we have to have a rigorous understanding of the psychological, scientific mind control dynamics as well as the spiritual battle. Now, when you do that, you can deprogram people quickly, if you choose to use that word. You can't get somebody out of a trance state if you don't know that they're in a trance state. So that's what God has called us to do, and that's why God has led me to spend so many years studying this and understanding it. And that's why we're moving forward with the building of our television studio, televising and broadcasting through social media, live streaming the Bible prophecy teaching, and the live streaming of the Paradise Mountain Church services, enhancing our social media, continuing to get books out there, videos, and all kinds of things, using communication technology to the maximum, to literally influence millions of people for Jesus Christ. I believe that it's doable. We're doing it, but we're going to really roll when we start to go visual. So, you can, you're faced like I am, like, Lord, what do you want me to do with my life? Where do you want me to put my energies and time? And the Lord has told me what to do concerning my life, and I know what I'm supposed to do. And I encourage you to seek the Lord and ask him what you're supposed to do. And in the meantime, I'm busy doing something that is producing results. You should see the letters and emails that come pouring through here. And again, we're a small ministry, but we need to ramp up our effectiveness, because there's millions of people whose lives are hanging in the balance. So I ask you to go to the Lord and simply ask the Lord, Lord, without any preconceptions, don't come to the Lord with a predetermined agenda. Go to the Lord with an open heart and an open mind and simply say, Lord Jesus Christ, I hear Paul's heart. I hear that he has a plan. He's done his homework. He has a burden from you to reach people. And if you believe in what I'm doing, then ask the Lord, Lord, how can I help him financially? And then whatever the Lord tells you to do in terms of what to give or contribute financially, how much to give financially in terms of gifts and contributions, simply obey the Lord and then be faithful, especially if you partner with us, because you give out of the cheerfulness of your own heart on a long-term basis. The key is that you're faithful. And then I cannot emphasize the need for people who are willing to partner with us in prayer and in spiritual warfare and intercession. And remember, this mindset of hopelessness is programming that has been embedded in the minds of Christians. And you and I don't have to be hopeless. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to be despairing. That didn't just originate in our heads. That was planted in our heads, okay? And it can be plucked out of our heads. See, it's a result of programming, because it produces. If you're listening to somebody, I don't care whether it's a Christian media source or a non-Christian media source, and you come away with a sense of paralysis, you're listening to the wrong communication source or the wrong ministry. God forbid that what I preach and teach should produce paralysis, because that's just what the devil wants. But I don't believe in paralysis. I believe that greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. And that's a fact that I can put my faith in. And he has called us before the beginning of time for such a time as this. I mean, we're rolling. I don't know about you, but we're rolling, and you can roll with us by seeking the Lord and praying. Thank you for listening to me. You can order the books. Please be patient till the book Conquering the Matrix comes off the presses. I need your patience. And also, we're going to be announcing a bunch of things that I think you will find exciting and encouraging. This is Paul McGuire, and visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Help us spread the word of the content of these messages so that we can equip people to be effective for the Lord Jesus Christ, and we can bring in a last day soul harvest and not prematurely falsely conclude that it's over. It's not over till it's over, folks. Again, this is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. God bless you, and pray. Let's pray for the people in Texas, in Florida and the surrounding areas. God bless you, Paul McGuire.